When I grew close to my stepson in our living room, where I had shared decades with my husband, I somehow didn't see it as wrong. The warmth of his body coursed through me, and I savored every second, because it felt necessary. But how did it all begin? I'm Sarah Thompson, 47, a single mom who's been navigating life with just me and my son, Noah, for over 20 years. He's 24 now, bright, steady, and the kind of kid who's been my anchor as much as I've been his. We've faced a lot together, life's ups and downs, work, growing up, and I thought I had our connection all figured out until recently. That evening felt like any other at first. Noah had been burning the candle at both ends with his new job and grad school exams. I could see the exhaustion etched on his face as he rubbed his temples, mumbling about needing a quick break. "You can rest in my room if you need," I said. "Just for a little while." He gave a tired nod and shuffled down the hall. Our old Denver house gets chilly in early winter, so I draped a heavy blanket over him and left him to rest. He was sprawled on my side of the bed, turned toward the wall, already drifting off. I settled beside him, scrolling through my phone, careful not to disturb him. At some point, I must have nodded off too. When I stirred, it wasn't a noise that woke me, but the feeling of Noah so close. He'd inched nearer, his warmth and steady breathing right beside me. Then I noticed his arm, lightly draped over me, gentle, almost like when he was a little boy, clinging to me during a thunderstorm. At first, it felt familiar, just a moment of comfort, a mother and son holding tight. But as we lay there, something shifted, and it didn't feel quite the same anymore. His hold tightened just a bit, not forceful, but deliberate. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if this was still about seeking solace. My pulse quickened. I stayed still, not out of choice, but because I didn't know what to do next. He moved closer again, and the quiet in the room grew heavy, almost suffocating. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. But then I felt it, a subtle tension, impossible to ignore. And the worst part? Noah wasn't asleep anymore. I didn't dare look at him, but I could sense his breath on my neck, slow and measured, like he was holding back. Then, in a whisper, he asked, "You okay, Mom?" I managed a slight nod, my throat too dry to speak. I wanted to say something casual to shatter the strange moment wrapping around us, but words wouldn't come. Noah's hand shifted, resting lightly on my arm, not wrong, but not simple to dismiss either. We stayed frozen like that, my mind racing, my heart pounding louder than it should have been. I didn't know what this moment was, or what it might turn into. Slowly, I turned to face him, careful not to tip the delicate balance we were treading. Noah's eyes met mine, not heavy with sleep, but carrying something deeper, softer, weightier. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. A question hung in his gaze, unspoken but heavy, like a mist settling between us. I forced a small smile, trying to lighten the air. "You need to get some rest," I whispered. He nodded but didn't budge. Instead, his hand lingered on mine, his thumb brushing gently along the edge, like an instinct, like a memory, or maybe something more. I told myself he was just worn out. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe I was the one making it strange. But the air between us was thick, charged with uncertainty and something we couldn't quite name. Time dragged on, each minute stretching endlessly. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, torn between pulling away and saying something, anything. Then Noah moved again, his fingers brushing a stray hair from my cheek. It was a small, almost innocent gesture, but it sent a chill through me. That's when I knew we couldn't pretend this moment was nothing anymore. Because, deep down, we both felt it wasn't. He murmured, "I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening." His voice, low and careful, wasn't just apologizing for the moment, it was for something bigger, for feelings he knew shouldn't be there. I sat up a little, putting some space between us. I needed air, clarity, a reminder of who I was, who we were. "We're just tight," I said quietly. "We've always been so close, maybe we just lost track of the boundaries." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the blanket. "Yeah, maybe." But then I caught it, the quiet, searching look he gave me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. In that glance, I saw everything, his confusion, his fear, his longing. And it broke my heart, because it mirrored my own. Before I could say more, the doorbell cut through the silence, sharp and startling, a reminder that the world outside still existed. I got up quickly, my chest still tight, and headed to the door. It was James, our neighbor, kind, dependable, the guy who'd clear your driveway without being asked. He gave a warm smile, but there was a pause, a flicker in his eyes, like he sensed something off. "Hey, Sarah," he said kindly. "It's getting chilly out. Thought your furnace might need a check." I blinked, grateful for the interruption but shaken by what it had broken. "Oh, thanks," I managed, steadying my voice. "That'd be great." He stepped inside, chatting easily as he headed to the heater in the living room. But the air had shifted. The warmth between Noah and me had faded, replaced by a tense quiet. I didn't need to look to know Noah was watching from the hallway, his presence lingered like a shadow just out of sight. James kept talking, his voice light, but mine was distant, my responses automatic, because all I could feel was Noah and the unspoken storm still swirling between us. After James left, promising to swing by if I needed anything, I gently shut the door and turned to find Noah still lingering in the hallway. His jaw was set, arms crossed tightly over his chest. For the first time, I saw it wasn't just quietness in him, he was upset, holding something back. Noah stayed silent at first. He stood there, shoulders stiff, arms locked, his face a mask I couldn't quite read. But I know my son too well to miss the turmoil brewing behind his stillness. I took a cautious step toward him. "You all right?" I asked softly, trying not to press too hard. "Yeah," he muttered, barely audible. "Just wasn't expecting James to drop by." I nodded slowly, searching for the right words, because I knew this wasn't really about James, not completely. "You seemed a little thrown," he said, eyes fixed somewhere past me. There it was, the real weight behind his tense shoulders, the slight clench of his jaw. I took a deep breath. He was just being neighborly. "You know how James is, always checking in." Noah gave a small nod, but I could tell my words didn't ease him. His gaze darted toward the living room where James had been moments before, and for a split second, I caught a flash in his eyes, something sharp, like jealousy. The thought twisted my gut. That kind of feeling had no place here, not between us, but the way he said James' name, the way he watched me when James was around, it planted a seed of unease I couldn't ignore. "Noah," I said softly, stepping closer, my voice gentle but firm. "You know you're my world, but tonight, it's been a lot for both of us." He stared at the floor, his voice tight. "I know. I didn't mean 29 to make things strange earlier. I don't even know what I was feeling. Still don't." His raw honesty hit me hard, not because it was news, but because saying it out loud made it undeniable. And undeniable things are tough to brush off. I nodded. "It's okay to be mixed up. We've been each other's everything for so long, sometimes the lines get fuzzy." He didn't respond, but just when I thought he'd shut down, he brushed past me, slow and quiet, heading to his room. The door clicked shut softly, leaving me alone in the hallway, weighed down by all the things we hadn't said. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my hands together, trying to anchor myself. The night felt topsy-turvy. I wasn't mad or ashamed, but I was rattled to my core. How had we veered so far from where we started? And why, deep down, did a tiny part of me already miss that closeness we'd shared? The hours slipped by in silence. I stayed on the couch, lights low, the house wrapped in stillness. Then, a soft knock, not from the front door, but hesitant, familiar. It was Noah's knock. "Come in," I said, sitting up quickly. Noah eased the door open just enough to slip inside. He didn't look angry anymore, just worn out, torn. He sat beside me without a word. For a long stretch, we just sat there, no TV, no phones, just quiet. Then, in a small voice, he said, "Mom, I'm sorry about all of it." "You don't need to apologize," I said, keeping my voice steady even as my heart wavered. I do, he pushed back, because I don't know where that came from. I wasn't thinking straight. I just felt so close to you, and I didn't know how to stop it. I looked at him, really looked. His face, so familiar yet twisted with conflict, broke my heart in a way I wasn't prepared for. We've always been tight, I said. But closeness can mess with your heart sometimes. He nodded slowly. Is that all this is? Just confusion? I didn't have an answer, and that scared me. He rested his head on my shoulder, like he used to when he was little. And I didn't pull away, because, honestly, in that moment, I didn't want to. We sat there, side by side on the couch, my son leaning into me like he did as a kid. The room was still, but it wasn't calm, it felt like the hush before a storm. I stayed still, not because I wanted to freeze the moment, but because I didn't know what moving would mean. Having him so close felt warm, familiar, yet somehow foreign too. My thoughts kept circling back to that look in his eyes, the way he'd reached for me, the way I hadn't stopped him. Noah broke the quiet, his voice low, uncertain. I don't want to ruin what we have. You're not, I said softly, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We're just sorting through this. He nodded, but his jaw was tight, like he was holding back something he wasn't ready to voice. I keep thinking about earlier, he whispered, about how it felt. I know I shouldn't. I know it's not right. But I don't feel guilty, and that's what freaks me out. My stomach churned, not because I was surprised, but because I'd felt it too, and hearing it said out loud left nowhere to hide. I turned to face him, choosing my words carefully, each one heavy. Noah, I said, it's okay to crave closeness. We're human, we need connection. But we've got to be careful where those feelings lead. I know, he murmured. But it wasn't just comfort. It felt bigger. My breath hitched. He wasn't wrong, and that truth shook me to my core. Maybe we need a little breathing room, I suggested, some time to clear our heads, figure out what's real and what's just, the weight of all these years together. Noah looked at me, his eyes heavy with emotion. I don't know how to step back from you, Mom. You're my whole world. That hit me hard because it was true. And maybe that's why our boundaries had started to blur. When you're each other's everything for so long, lines don't just fade, they disappear. I reached out, resting my hand on his, a simple touch to ground us. I love you, I said. That's never going to change. But we've got to protect what we have, not let confusion twist it into something that breaks us. He nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on mine, still holding something unsaid. Just as I opened my mouth to say more, a firm knock at the front door snapped us out of it. My heart raced as the tension in the room dissolved into sharp alertness. I stood quickly and opened the door to find James again, his face serious, worried. Sarah, he said, studying me closely. I know it's late, but are you okay? You seemed off earlier. I heard a faint shuffle behind me, and when I glanced back, there was Noah, rooted in the hallway, his eyes fixed on us, silent as a ghost in the dim light. I forced a small, strained smile, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm all right, James. Really, it's just been a long, exhausting day, I said, hoping my words sounded convincing. James's eyes flicked past me, landing briefly on Noah before settling back on my face. Okay, he said slowly, his tone careful, like he was weighing every word. But you know I'm just next door if you need me, for anything. I nodded, managing a quiet, thanks, James. I appreciate it. As he turned and walked down the snowy path, his boots crunching faintly against the cold ground, I closed the door with a gentle push, letting out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My chest felt tight, like the air in the house had thickened. When I turned around, Noah was still standing there, his gaze locked on me, but something in his expression had shifted. The confusion I'd seen earlier was giving way to something rawer, more conflicted, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Then, out of the blue, he spoke, his voice low and sharp, cutting through the quiet. Were you hoping it was him at the door? The words hit me like a slap, and I froze, my heart stuttering. What, James? I asked, my voice catching in my throat, barely above a whisper. When he knocked, Noah said, his eyes searching mine, you looked relieved, like you were glad it was him. I stared at him, my stomach twisting, his words sinking in like stones. Noah, that's not fair, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady, but it trembled anyway. Maybe it's not, he snapped, his tone sharper than I expected, but that's what I saw, Mom. Without another word, he turned, his footsteps heavy on the old wooden floor, and disappeared down the hall. When his bedroom door clicked shut, it wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that felt final, like a chapter closing on something I couldn't quite name. I stood there, my hand still lingering on the doorknob, the cool metal grounding me as Noah's question echoed in my mind. Were you hoping it was him? It wasn't just an accusation, it was a plea, a flicker of doubt and hurt wrapped in those words. My heart ached because part of me knew he wasn't entirely wrong. I hadn't been relieved because I wanted James, not like that. But his knock had been a lifeline, a brief escape from the tangled knot of emotions that had been tightening between Noah and me all night. The house felt too small, the walls too close, and that moment of interruption had let me breathe, if only for a second. The living room was quiet now, the faint hum of the heater the only sound breaking the stillness. I leaned against the door, my mind replaying the way Noah's face had looked, his jaw tight, his eyes carrying a mix of hurt and something else, something I was afraid to name. For years, it had been just us, Noah and me, building a life together, filling in the gaps where others might have been. But tonight, that closeness felt like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. His question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears, and I didn't know how to answer it, not for him, and not for myself. The soft click of Noah's door shutting reverberated through the quiet house, louder than it should have been, like a heartbeat in the stillness. I stood frozen, my fingers still wrapped around the cool metal of the doorknob, my feet glued to the floor. His question, were you hoping it was him, kept circling in my head, over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. It wasn't just words, it felt like a mix of accusation and desperation, as if Noah was reaching for some kind of reassurance, or maybe grappling with feelings he didn't know how to pin down. I wanted to run after him, to fling open his door and explain that James knocking didn't mean what he thought. It wasn't about James, not in the way he feared. But deep down, I couldn't deny the truth, I had felt a flicker of relief when James showed up, not because I wanted him, not like that, but because his presence had been a brief escape from the heavy, tangled mess of emotions building up between Noah and me. The walls of our little Denver home felt like they were closing in, and that knock had given me a moment to catch my breath, to step back from the edge of something I didn't fully understand. I let go of the doorknob and sank onto the edge of my bed, the old mattress creaking under my weight. My eyes traced the worn floorboards, scuffed from years of us moving through this house together. The silence was overwhelming, almost too loud, my thoughts screaming in the quiet. How had we gotten here? Noah and I had always been a unit, just the two of us against the world since he was a baby. I raised him on my own, through sleepless nights and scraped knees, through teenage heartaches and late-night talks over pizza. We'd filled in the empty spaces where a father should have been, leaning on each other, building something stronger than just mother and son. We were partners, a team forged in love, trust, and the kind of survival that comes from knowing it's just you and your kid against everything else. But somewhere along the way, those clear, sharp lines we'd drawn, lines that kept us safe, that defined us, had started to blur. And now, they were bending in ways that sent a chill through me, ways that made my heart race with a fear I didn't want to name. I pressed my hands to my face, feeling the warmth of my palms against my cheeks, trying to ground myself. The room smelled faintly of the lavender candle I'd burned earlier, but even that familiar comfort couldn't ease the knot in my chest. I kept seeing Noah's face, the hurt in his eyes, the way his voice had cracked when he asked about James. It wasn't just jealousy, though that was there too. It was something deeper, a fear that maybe I was slipping away from him, or worse, that we were slipping into something we didn't know how to navigate. For so long, we'd been each other's everything, but now I wondered if that closeness had become too much, too heavy, pulling us into a space where love and need got tangled up in ways they shouldn't. For what felt like an eternity, 2 long hours, I paced the narrow hallway, my footsteps muffled on the worn rug, each step a tug-of-war between wanting to knock on Noah's door and letting the heavy silence settle around us. My heart was a jumbled mess, caught between the urge to fix this, to talk it out, and the fear that words might only make things messy. Finally, when the weight of it all became too much to carry, I turned to the one thing that always calms me when I'm unraveling. I made tea. The kettle's sharp whistle pierced the stillness of the house, and the soothing scent of chamomile drifted through the kitchen, curling around me like a warm hug. I poured the steaming water into a mug, the familiar ritual grounding me, and with the warm ceramic cradled in my hands, I walked to Noah's door. I tapped lightly, my knuckles barely grazing the wood. No answer. "Noah," I called softly, my voice barely above a whisper, "I made some tea. Wanna come sit with me for a bit?" There was a long, agonizing pause, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. Then, the door creaked open, just a sliver at first. Noah's eyes met mine through the narrow gap, cautious and guarded, like he was bracing for something. But slowly, he pulled the door wider and stepped out, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own. We shuffled into the living room and settled onto the couch, the warmth of our mug seeping into our hands, anchoring us in the quiet. Noah didn't look at me right away, his gaze stayed fixed on the faint curls of steam rising from his tea, like he was searching for answers in the wisps. After a moment, he broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "I didn't mean to throw that at you about James," he said, his words heavy with regret. I let out a soft breath, trying to keep my voice gentle. "It's okay, Noah. You're allowed to feel whatever's going on inside you. It's a lot for both of us to untangle." He gave a small nod, barely noticeable, his eyes still on his mug. "It's just, earlier, I felt something," he said, his words slow, deliberate, like he was choosing each one with care. "I didn't know what to do with it, didn't know how to handle it. And then when you opened the door for him, it hit me hard, like maybe I'm not the only one wrestling with something here." His confession stole the air from my lungs, leaving me breathless. I wanted to be honest, but I wasn't sure how much truth I could share without breaking something fragile between us. "Noah," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady, "what we're feeling, it's all mixed up because we've been each other's whole world for so long. That kind of closeness, it can blur things, make them confusing." He lifted his eyes to mine, and there was no hesitation in his gaze, just a raw, unflinching intensity. "But it's not just that, is it, Mom?" he asked, his voice quiet but piercing. I froze, my heart stuttering, because he was right, it wasn't just that. There was something delicate and dangerous hovering between us, teetering on the edge of something we couldn't take back. Then, slowly, with a kind of careful reverence, he reached out, his hands enveloping mine, warm and steady. When I didn't pull away, he leaned closer, his forehead gently pressing against mine. I closed my eyes, my breath slowing, the world around us fading into a hush. The living room, with its familiar creaks and shadows, seemed to vanish, leaving just the two of us in this quiet, fragile moment. For a heartbeat, it felt like we were slipping into something deeper, something that both warmed and terrified me, like standing at the edge of a cliff, feeling the pull of the drop. A sudden, sharp knock at the front door snapped us out of the moment, like a crack of thunder splitting the quiet. Noah and I both jumped, the fragile connection between us shattering like a glass slipping from my hands and smashing on the floor. My heart thudded in my chest, loud and unsteady, as I stood up, my trembling fingers fumbling to set my mug on the coffee table. I walked to the door, my nerves buzzing like live wires under my skin, each step heavy with the weight of what had just been interrupted. When I opened the door, there was James again, his face stripped of its usual warm smile, replaced by a serious, almost troubled expression that made my stomach tighten. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and heavy, carrying a gravity that felt out of place in the stillness of the night. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, my hand still gripping the edge of the door, acutely aware of Noah's gaze boring into my back from the living room. It was like I could feel the heat of his stare, intense and unwavering, even without turning around. James stepped just inside the doorway, not pushing further, but his presence filled the room with a quiet tension, like the low, steady hum of a storm approaching. Noah hadn't moved from the couch, but I didn't need to look to know his eyes were locked on us, his silence louder than any words. The contrast between the two of them hit me like a wave. James, solid and reliable, the kind of man who'd show up with a toolbox before you even asked, and Noah, who'd been my entire world since the moment I first held him in my arms, tiny and new, in a hospital room 24 years ago. James stood there, his broad shoulders framed by the doorway, his eyes searching mine with a quiet concern that felt both comforting and intrusive. Noah, on the other hand, was my anchor, my constant, the one who'd shared every high and low of our life together, from late-night giggles over cartoons to the quiet tears of harder days. But now, that bond felt like it was teetering on the edge of something unfamiliar, something that made my chest ache with both love and fear. The air in the room was thick, charged with the unspoken weight of everything that had passed between Noah and me, and James's presence only seemed to amplify it, like a spotlight on a stage I wasn't ready to step onto. His eyes drifted away from mine, his face cracking open with raw, unguarded emotion. "I don't know how to go back to the way things were before," Noah said, his voice rough, like it was scraping against something deep inside him. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and whispered, "Maybe we're not supposed to just rewind. Maybe we need to carve out a new path, apart, so we can grow into more than the roles we've clung to for so long." The silence that settled between us wasn't heavy like before, it was different, almost gentle, like the quiet pause after a long storm, necessary and grounding. Noah brushed past me, his footsteps slow, almost hesitant, like he was carrying the weight of our whole history. At the front door, he paused, his hand resting on the knob, his back to me. In a low, steady voice, he said, "I think I need to stay with a friend for a bit, a week or two, to clear my head." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, my heart aching at the thought of him leaving. "That's okay," I said softly, my voice barely holding steady. "Do what you need to." Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click, no anger, no drama, just a quiet kind of finality that echoed in my chest. I stood alone in the living room, the stillness wrapping around me like a heavy quilt. But for the first time that night, it didn't feel suffocating. It was calm, like the house itself was taking a breath, giving us both a moment to just be. Later, I sank onto the couch, the worn cushions creaking under me, and let my eyes wander around the empty room. The faint scent of Noah's cologne lingered in the air, mixing with the familiar smell of our old Denver home, wood polish and winter chill seeping through the windows. For the first time in what felt like years, I let myself cry. Not out of guilt or shame, but because I was grieving the version of us that had slipped away, piece by piece, without me even noticing. We'd been a team, Noah and I, ever since he was a baby, just the two of us against the world. But that closeness, that unshakable bond, had started to blur in ways I hadn't expected, and now I was left wondering how we'd let it get so tangled. In the weeks that followed, Noah and I didn't talk much, but we didn't cut each other off either. We exchanged short texts, careful, thoughtful messages that felt like small bridges between us. "Doing okay?" I'd write. "Yeah, just figuring things out," he'd reply, always with a little emoji, a smiley face or a thumbs up, like he was trying to reassure me. He needed space to untangle his thoughts, and I needed clarity to make sense of my own heart. For so long, we'd been each other's everything, mother and son, confidants, partners in survival. But maybe now, for the first time, we were giving ourselves permission to find out who we could be apart, to rediscover ourselves as individuals, not just as pieces of each other. Some love is sacred, pure, like a flame that never flickers. Some gets twisted up in the loneliness of years spent leaning too hard on one another. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is step back, take a breath, and pull away before you stumble over a line you can't uncross. We didn't cross that line, thank God, but we danced too close to it, close enough to feel its shadow. That closeness, that fleeting moment when the boundaries blurred, will always echo in the quiet corners of my heart, like a song I can't quite forget.